everyone, it's Paige. Welcome back to my channel. As promised, today's video is going to be my top 10 books of 2020. My last video was a wrap-up of every single book, which was 51 books that I read in 2020, and I asked you guys to maybe guess which ones were my favorite. I tried to play it cool, but this is the video where I will not be playing it cool. I am going to fangirl and freak out and try to convince you as best I can to read these books. If you are not new to my channel, you might be able to guess the books that I'm about to discuss based off of the books that are literally missing from my bookcases, but hopefully this is a bit of a surprise anyway. Without further ado, starting at number 10, we have Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. This is a book that I have continuously brought up since I read it, I believe, in October. This is a supernatural horror thriller novel that takes place in a furniture store that is like IKEA, and every morning that the employees come in, they find things out of place and mysterious liquids about, and essentially what happens is that their boss hires them to stay overnight and observe what happens overnight. This had to make it on my list because I just found myself thinking about this book way after it was done. I mean, the format of the book in general is just incredible. It looks like an IKEA catalog and it holds true to that throughout the book, and like the images get increasingly more disturbing. From the get-go, on the cover itself, you can see a few spooky details, like the picture frames in the cover have this spooky face and some hands, and throughout you'll see different like catalog-like images. This one is like, you know, the map of the store and everything. It's just extremely believable, which I found, you know, added to the creepiness level of the book. The only reason this isn't higher on my list is because, and I said this before in my initial review of it, but I hadn't expected it to take such a classic supernatural horror path. I was expecting the supernatural twist or horror twist to be a little bit more unique, and it didn't necessarily do that. Regardless, I think it worked really, really well, and I'll never look at IKEA the same way again. I highly recommend that book to people who like classic supernatural stories because it definitely takes a contemporary twist on that by taking the classic haunted house story and placing it in something as contemporary as an IKEA. Okay, coming in at number 9, and this is a surprise to me as well as maybe a few of you. I thought this book would make it in my top 3 or even top 5, but yeah. So that is Illuminae by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is a young adult sci-fi novel that follows a teenage girl named Katie. Katie lives on this planet owned by this corporation that uses that planet for mining and other purposes, and one day it is invaded by this rival company who essentially wants to wipe out everyone there, take the resource for themselves, and not leave a trace behind. But some of the residents of this planet end up escaping, and they are essentially in this very long space chase where they're being pursued by the rival company who are hoping to destroy them before they can get to a base and alert everyone to the fact that this rival company tried to kill a bunch of people and do lots of bad things. The reason why I am specifically listing this book as number 9 on my list and not mentioning the other 2 books in the trilogy, which are Gemina and Obsidio, is because I immensely enjoyed this first book, and I did enjoy the other 2, but I feel like the peak was met in this book, and I didn't feel like the other 2 lived up to the hype that I felt while reading this book. Reason why is because, I mean, there's just so much to love in this book. There's this like space plague that's taking everyone by storm. There's of course like the space race and like space war that's going on. There is a little bit of romance, off the wall AI. There's just like a lot. It was an adventure from start to finish, and I enjoyed every single moment of it. I could have stopped at this book and been completely content. Highly recommend that you give this book a try if you like science fiction, or even if you just like fantasy, because I am typically a person that leans towards fantasy and not so much towards science fiction, but I would without a doubt read more books that were like this. Okay, in place number 8, we have The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. This is not a new book, but I just discovered it, or I just read it this year for a class that I was taking that was about the representation of children in young adult literature. This was a class that I had to take as a part of getting my certification to teach English. So we did read this book among many others, and I enjoyed this immensely. This is a young adult coming-of-age fiction story that follows a Native American boy named Junior who lives on a reservation, and he is a budding artist and he has lots of aspirations, and one day he decides that he would like to transfer schools and go to this all-white school called Reardon High School that is outside of the reservation. Because of this decision, Junior faces a lot of controversy, both from the people on his reservation that he's grown up with and from these new white people at Reardon. I absolutely flew through this, which was totally unexpected, and despite the fact that I have not personally read Diary of a Wimpy Kid, the artwork in this book, yes, there is artwork and it adds to the story just phenomenally. It really reminded me of the art style from Diary of a Wimpy Kid, but the content is definitely much more mature. This book deals with alcoholism, child abuse, poverty, post-colonialism. This is a very beginner-friendly type of Native American literature, even though it's also been disputed whether this is considered Native American literature since it appeals to a large group of people. I would be happy to move on from this book and read more Native American literature, so if you have any recommendations for me, I would be super glad to hear them. Just drop them below. Okay, moving on. At number 7, I have Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I discovered Silvia Moreno Garcia this year, and after reading this book, I went ahead and read my second book of hers, which was Mexican Gothic, but overall, this book was definitely my favorite of hers this year, and obviously one of my favorites in general of the year. This is an historical fiction fantasy that's set in Mexico during the Jazz Age, and it follows a girl named Cassiopeia who lives this sort of Cinderella tale alongside her mother because after her father died, she and her mother moved in with her grandfather on her mother's side, and that family sort of treats her and her mother like servants until one day she discovers this mysterious chest in her grandfather's house. She opens it and discovers the Mayan god of death, who pops out and is like,
"Hey, let's go on an adventure. You're kind of obliged to do so now."
So her and the Mayan god of death are kind of like connected, and they must go on an adventure to recover his godly body parts. Totally awesome, totally cool, such a vibrant story full of Mayan mythology, which I have not personally been very knowledgeable about. Even after this book, there's so much for me to learn. I loved getting to see a foreign country, meaning outside of the US, which is where I'm from, during the Jazz Age. I loved the female and the male lead in this book. I loved their chemistry. Highly recommend this if you are interested in getting out of the usual settings, meaning that of Western United States settings, and experiencing some Mayan mythology and some Mexican culture. Coming in at number 6, I do not have a physical copy of this book because I listened to it over audiobook, but that is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is an historical fiction novel that is set in the 1970s, and it follows the sort of rise in fame of a rock band that was iconic in the 70s called Daisy Jones and the Six. So it sort of follows the band's journey from being sort of undiscovered and separate from one another to them joining together, to them coming to the height of their fame where they had all these awesome hits, and then their eventual split, and why that happened. I've said before that they kind of reminded me of Fleetwood Mac because of the kind of strenuous ties between the members and the sort of romance that's involved. In short, I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was phenomenal, and I thought that the voice actors were so incredible. It's a full cast. I'm going to say this again, please listen to the audiobook. I've said this multiple times at this point, but it feels so realistic. It does really feel like you are listening to a nonfiction account of everything that happened. This book made me cry for a reason I will not name. It is funny in a heartfelt sort of way, and it's realistic and it's dramatic. I don't know. I just really liked it. Intermission. We are at my top 5. This is where I basically break the rules and I count full series as just one spot in this list, so I apologize. Okay, coming in at number 5, The Cruel Prince series by Holly Black. This is a young adult fantasy series that I finally finished this year. I did read The Cruel Prince, I believe, in 2019, but then I did not finish the series, so I went ahead and finished The Wicked King and The Queen of Nothing, which are books 2 and 3 in the series. I also read the collection of short stories that Holly Black wrote that's tied to this universe too. This follows a girl named Jude, who is fully human, but when she was 7 years old, her parents were killed by a fae, and she was whisked away along with her 2 sisters to the fae realm. She has grown up in the fae realm as a full human, being utterly convinced that the only way that she can hold her own in this realm is to become as powerful as she possibly can. So she's a talented fighter, a strategist, and she has the ambition of making her way into some prominent position in the royal court. Suffice to say that she ends up getting wrapped up in the politics of the fae realm, and she gets wrapped up with her arch nemesis, Cardan. I don't know what took me so long to finally finish the series. I think I was actually scared by how much I enjoyed the first book that, you know, I was a little bit worried about continuing on, but I'm super glad that I finished. I absolutely love Jude and Cardan. Oh my goodness. And I love the 2 extremes of the human realm, which is totally the same as our realm, and the fae realm. And I love that Jude can traverse between both. I love the 3 sisters and their different priorities and their different values. I love Cardan and his struggle of being a prince, but like not a respected prince. It's great. I absolutely love it. The only reason this is not like in my top 3 maybe is because I felt that at the end, and as you can maybe see this last book, I felt like things were a little bit rushed. There was like a lot that was introduced in the last book, but not enough like page time to deal with it all, in my opinion. Or maybe I just felt like I just wanted more time with the characters in this world, but that's the only reason that this is not in my, probably like my top 3. Okay, number 4 on my list, despite the pain that it cost me, is The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. This is an historical fiction that follows a boy named Amir who grows up in Afghanistan in the 60s/70s, and he is great friends with another boy named Hassan, who is technically like his and his father's servant boy. Due to like conflicts with obviously the Soviet Union, United States was involved in everything that happened, Amir ends up fleeing his home country and going to America, and he leaves behind Hassan. This is a tale of heartbreak. It's very sad. It's traumatic to read, and you guys probably already know that because of the extensive amount of updates I did on Goodreads as I was getting through this book, where it just at every turn was traumatizing me and making me want to cry. It's heavy, heavy, heavy. Of course it's heavy because it deals with so much war and strife and abuse and racism. I needed to read it. It was something I needed to read. Literally, it was something I needed to read because I chose to read this book to make a unit plan for high school seniors, and because I had chosen this book, I could not then, like, not choose this book. I had chosen it, and I was stuck with it, and I had to read it, and it did me a little bit dirty. But I did like to see Afghanistan through the eyes of Khaled Hosseini, who is from Afghanistan. A lot of this book, I think, was inspired by his own life and his own experiences. Amir, as a protagonist, is... that wasn't the appeal of the book for me. Amir was not the appeal of the book, but the plot of the book and the setting of the book and the side characters. I mean, Hassan is too precious for the world. It is what it is. It's number 4 because it opened my eyes. I can't even talk about that book without getting like tongue-tied because I don't know what to say about it, you know. And literally when I finished the book and I gave it 5 stars, one of you on Goodreads was like, I thought you hated this book, and like, I did hate it. I hate the book. Yeah. Moving on to number 3, and one of you guessed this in the comments in my last video. Yes, this book did make it in my top 10, and in fact my top 5, and in fact my top 3. So that book is Nosferatu by Joe Hill. This is a horror fantasy novel. I've talked about this book multiple times at this point. I talked about it when I wrapped it up. I talked about it in my Dark Christmas TBR. I talked about it in my Halloween horror or suggestion, you know, whatever, TBR, whatever. And the reason why is because it blew me away. I did not expect to come across such a jewel of a book. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I had no idea that this book was not a classic sort of gothic vampire story. There are vampiric qualities to the villains in this story, but it was not what I was expecting at all. I was practically expecting like a modern Dracula Like literally, that's what I went into with the mindset of, because I had not read literally anything about the book before I started listening to the audiobook, which was fantastic. So this book follows a girl named Victoria McQueen, who has this ability to take her bike and just go any place she wants to over this covered bridge in the woods. She can go anywhere she wants. As long as she can picture it, she can get there. And as she grows up, she meets sort of other people with other strange abilities, and she one day learns of a man named Charles Manx, who has a very similar talent to Victoria in that he can take his Rolls Royce and he can go to this fictional plane of existence that he's created called Christmasland. And Charles Manx likes to kidnap children and take them to Christmasland with him. So we get to see Victoria from a child to an adult. She's a fantastic protagonist. We do have a few other viewpoints in this book. It's been a while since I read it, so excuse me if I'm a little bit blurry on it, but I do recall there being maybe a couple other viewpoints which add to the story, so you get a more well-rounded idea of what Charles Manx is doing. But essentially it is kind of a hero versus villain story with this weird influence of like Christmas. Completely random, it seems like what was Joe Hill thinking that he was like, I just don't know where his mindset was at when he came up with the plot of this book. It seems so dysfunctional and just all over the place, and it works so well. It just works really, really well. And I think part of the charm of the book is that it is very realistic. Like, Victoria is a realistic protagonist to me. She makes mistakes as she grows up. She has sort of an addictive personality and she self-sabotages, but there's just so much to love about that, and there's so much to love about the people that she meets as an adult and the people that she becomes close with. Pleasant surprise. Highly recommend it. Okay, we're on to number 2, and again we have a full series here. My number 2 is the Queen of the Tearling series. I read all 3 this year. When I first started reading the series, or even before, I think I had this in a haul, these books in a haul at some point, and I had read the synopsis of this book series and I thought, this sounds like a Disney princess story. And I said that to you guys, and those of you who have actually read this series were probably like, you couldn't be farther from the truth. And I couldn't be farther from the truth. This is not a Disney princess story at all. Essentially, and this is, I hate giving you the synopsis because it doesn't fit the series at all. This follows a princess named Kelsey. And Kelsey has been kind of raised in isolation away from her kingdom until her 19th birthday, when she is basically retrieved and taken to her kingdom to take her throne. When she arrives, her uncle is currently on the throne, so he doesn't want her on the throne. Kind of like the court is against her. It seems like her kingdom's against her. She has enemies on all sides. And on top of that, there's this like enemy kingdom that is ruled by a figurehead called the Red Queen, who is also Kelsey's enemy. Why did I love this series? It's fantastic. I don't want to spoil anything for you guys. It combines so many modern elements, and in the first book especially, you get so many hints at like the backstory of the Tearling, which is the kingdom that Kelsey is the queen of. The lore behind this series is untouchable. I have not read a fantasy series with a lore as surprising and intense as the lore that is behind this. And on top of that, Kelsey as a protagonist has to be one of my favorite fantasy female protagonists of all time. She is smart, she's cunning, she is witty. Don't get me wrong, I love a good female protagonist who can like handle her weapons and like fight and be a spy and all that stuff, but that's not Kelsey. Kelsey is not a strong protagonist because she can like fight. She's a strong protagonist because she is smart and she's kind and compassionate. Ugh, I loved it so much. Okay, so now what we've all been waiting for, including myself. And since it hasn't shown up to this point, maybe you've already guessed. But my number 1 of 2020 was Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This was the first book that I read in the year. The first book. I read this in January of 2020. It's been a long time since I read it. I thought there has to be something that's going to take this book's place. There's no way that the first book that I read in the year is going to be my favorite of the year. But it is. This was Leigh Bardugo's debut adult fantasy novel. This follows a girl named Alex Stern, who is a freshman at Yale University. This is upside down. sorry. And she was actually approached by this like underground secret magical organization at Yale because she has the ability to see ghosts. So she is sought out and she is basically recruited both as a student to Yale and as a part of this society. And what this society does, Ninth House, is they look over all of the other secret magical organizations at Yale to make sure that they're not doing anything like unsanctioned or even shadier than is normal. All of these societies at Yale deal with different magics. Like some deal with like blood magic or like, you know, just weather magic. Like they all deal with a different sector of magic. And it is Alex's job to make sure that they're not doing anything fishy. But when a murder takes place, she is kind of responsible for investigating it and discovering whether or not one of those societies was the culprit. What I love so much about this book is the fact that it's this wonderful mix of like a mystery novel and a fantasy novel. I loved getting to see all of the artifacts that Alex has like access to because she's in the society and they've collected like artifacts throughout the years that like have different magical powers. I loved getting to see Alex learn about different magic and how to use it and like the protocol for different types of magic. I don't know, there's so much cool stuff in this book, and I felt so drawn into the setting of Yale. Kelsey was one of my new favorite protagonists. Definitely Alex is one for me as well, because she has a very dark past. She doesn't fit into the setting of Yale. Like she doesn't come from a wealthy family. She just is perfectly imperfect. She is the outsider at Yale that is somehow responsible for making sure everything stays in line. I feel like so often I read protagonists that come from like a very privileged place, and Alex is not that protagonist at all. So I think just finally getting to see a protagonist at all like Alex was really fulfilling, and also getting to see her in this completely amazing environment like Yale. People complain that this book was too long, that it drags. I don't know, obviously I kind of disagree because I just like spending as much time in this world as possible, but I can see how people would say that this is over long. It definitely is a long book, but it was such a tragedy to have to put this down at the end. And I keep checking, I feel like I check like every week to see if there's news about the second book in this series, but there still isn't. I'm absolutely dying to know what happens after this book. So those were my 10 books, my top 10 books of 2020. Were they what you expected? And more than that, what were your favorite books of 2020? So I will also have a list in my description box below of my favorite songs of 2020 and my favorite TV shows of 2020. So if you would like to take a look at those, just go below and check them out. And with that being said, I am going to probably sign off now, but thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell to get notifications when I post. I have started streaming when I play games occasionally because it allows me the opportunity to talk to you guys while I'm already doing something I like. If you have specific requests for games that you would like me to play, then you know I'm open to all suggestions. Just let me know what they are. Anyway, I hope you're having a great week, and I will see you back here very, very soon. Bye!